The views expressed on Skeptically Speaking do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the University of Alberta, the Students' Union, or CJSR.
Hello and welcome to Skeptically Speaking, the show that asks you to call in and question everything. I'm your host, Desiree Schell. After studying over 60,000 people diagnosed with brain tumors between 1974 and 2003, researchers from Denmark, Finland, Norway, and Sweden have reported that brain tumor rates have not increased since use of cell phones became widespread in the 1990s, which is good news for those of us with cell phone addiction issues. But unfortunately, there are still many other things that can give us tumors. And interestingly, radiation can be both the cause and the treatment. So today we'll be talking to Dr. Marc MacKenzie about radiation and health. But let's start with some speaking up. Our guest today is Bart G. Farkas. Bart is the new Public Relations and Fundraising Manager at the James Randi Educational Foundation, otherwise known as the JREF. An author and former registered nurse, Bart turned his life over to skepticism and joined the JREF in an effort to help forward critical thinking and skepticism the world over. Bart's skeptical interests lie in quack medical claims and religious issues. He resides in the icy climes of Cochrane, Alberta, with his wife and 3 children. Welcome to Skeptically Speaking, Bart.
Thanks.
So for everyone else who doesn't know, explain the JREF.
The JREF is the James Randi Educational Foundation, and this is an institution that was formed in 1996 by a famous magician, and some would say the world's most famous, debunker, although he wouldn't like that word, I don't think. Randi is a magician, and he appeared 38 times on The Tonight Show and on Happy Days and other TV shows, and he had a long career. He toured with Alice Cooper and this kind of thing. And as his career kind of started to wind down, I guess, as a magician, he picked up the mantle of critical thinking and skepticism and started the James Randi Educational Foundation. Before that, he was one of the founders of PsyCop, which is now the Center for Inquiry. So he definitely was in on the ground floor, and he was the originator of the famous challenge, which is now $1 million paranormal challenge.
So what does the JREF do?
The JREF, its mission statement is to forward critical thinking and to uncover and expose frauds and charlatans who are using paranormal phenomena to exploit people. So say someone is claiming they're psychic and they're telling somebody that they're inhabited by evil spirits, and if they can come up with $20,000, then this person can get the evil spirits to go away.
Right.
Those are some of the things. I mean, it's such the breadth of things the JREF does along those lines. It's so great that it'd be difficult for me to list them all even, but basically, it's a skeptical organization with a mandate to forward critical thinking and just help people be educated about the reality of our world.
So if people already know about the JREF, then they know that there was some big news this week. Do you just want to briefly tell us about that?
Sure. So the big news is that our former president, Phil Plait, who some might know as the bad astronomer, he stepped down as the president of the JREF this last week to pursue some TV deals, I think, something like that. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but he's doing some TV work. Of course, he also works with the Discovery Channel and their website. And in his place, we have DJ Grothy, who is a very competent leader from the Center for Inquiry. Actually, he's been at the Center for Inquiry for, I think, a dozen years. So he's leaving one family and coming to another. If you're a podcaster who listens to rational or skeptical podcasts, then you would know him as the host of Point of Inquiry.
Right. So can the changing of the guard be taken as a symbol of other changes to come, specifically with the education part of the James Randi Educational Foundation?
Right. Well, we're moving forward to push forward the the JREF's educational mandate much further forward than we have in the past. So in the coming year, we have a fundraising campaign that's going on right now, the Season of Reason. What we're looking at, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating a network of critical thinkers, entertainers, average everyday people who will help to get the word out to children in sort of grade school kids and middle school aged kids across North America.
So what kind of things are you looking at? You said speakers, entertainers, anyone that we know of?
Oh, well,
can you disclose at this point?
There's lots of friends of JREF, so I mean, I think you could expect, and I can't guarantee that these people will be involved, but I can just throw the names out there. So, people that typically help us are Penn and Teller and Adam Savage of MythBusters fame.
Now, how awesome would that be to have Adam Savage come to your classroom to talk about science?
Oh yeah, that would be that would be awesome. He's a hardcore skeptic. He's a real rational thinker, and he never misses an amazing meeting. He comes down on his own dime, and he loves it. He's a huge asset to the movement, and he's a great guy too. He's a lot of fun. So, and then there's scientific luminaries. There's the P.G. Myers of the world, and people like Banachek and Jamie Ian Swiss, who are mentalists and magicians who are just incredible people to watch, and they also add a lot. So there's actually a huge list of people, and there's lots of people lining up to help out, and that's great. And if you've ever been to a TAM, you know that the TAM is the Amazing Meeting, which is our yearly skeptics conference in Las Vegas. A lot of the people there are doctors, they're PhD level educators, grad students, and such, and there's a lot of people out there who have a lot to offer to help sort of stop as Randy would say, stop the woo-woo of the world, and help us not be bowed by superstitions.
So there's something else that we spoke about before the show that you would be doing, sort of a youth-focused website potentially.
Right. So one of the things we're going to be doing is, we're going to have a youth-focused website, and the idea, just in a nutshell, the idea is to present an interesting topic. So something that's interesting to the audience we're trying to get at. So if we're looking at middle school boys, zombies are a big, that's a popular thing. I have a son who's 11, and he loves zombies.
As a previous middle school girl, I'd like to point out that also very big fan of zombies.
That was sexist of me, I guess. So,
no, definitely.
I'm speaking in generalities,
right.
Of course. So the idea is to have, on a website to have some really cool, fun stuff about zombies, the fantasy stuff about zombies, but also talk about the science behind zombies. For example, Wade Davis, who did his work trying to find the zombification drug, and then how a lot of scientists subsequently attacked his work and felt that it had the methodology of his studies were wrong or flawed. And so, in other words, it's a way for us to expose kids to the process of science, how the scientific process moves along, how we learn from our mistakes, and how if somebody comes up with an idea and could produce some kind of data, then other people have to produce the same data for that to sort of become science fact rather than science fiction. And we can do the same thing with vampires, or it could be that kind of stuff. We could also one of the other things we're going to be doing is like just talking about cosmetics, for example. All the ads you see on TV talking about age-defying proteins and amino acid chains, and
that's great.
All that kind of stuff. So what the idea is, we use somebody like, say, Adam Savage or other celebrities, Julia Sweeney or somebody like that, to pull in people, kids, and then we help them to understand the science behind it. And so it's sort of a multi-stage thing. We'll probably be doing some science fairs and that kind of stuff.
And that was what I was wondering about. You actually, on the Season of Reason page on the JREF website, it mentions a web-based science fair.
Right. Well, that's an exciting idea that Alison Smith, it's her brainchild. Mm-hmm. And I can't really say too much about it, actually, mostly because it's not my baby. I don't want to say anything that's wrong, basically. But yeah, a web-based science fair that will allow kids from anywhere with access to the web to participate in the science fair, and we'll have some cool celebrity judges. And I think Adam Savage has said he wants to be one of the judges for that. So,
that man is brilliant. He's been on this show, and he is absolutely and completely committed to anything skeptical. We are very lucky to have him.
Yeah, he's a great guy, and he gives a lot. I mean, for the other day he just mentioned the Season of Reason fundraising campaign on his Twitter account, and just him mentioning it on his Twitter account, we saw a huge spike in donations.
Awesome.
Just from him, one line. The guy, he's definitely has some power. And yeah, he's a great guy. We have to be careful not to
overuse him.
Not to bother him too much. That's for sure.
Well, that's a brilliant segue to you talking about the fundraising aspect of this. What do you want from people? The James Randi Educational Foundation is a nonprofit organization. It's in the United States they call it a 501c3. So it's a nonprofit, and everything we do is our books are open to everybody, and the work we do, requires funding. We have a staff, and so putting forward initiatives like this educational initiative that we're spearheading right now, it takes money, and so if we just ask if people believe in rational thought and critical thinking and science education, to consider the JREF as a place to donate a little bit of money, because we believe it's going to a good thing. Randy and the JREF have been responsible for uncovering a lot of woo, as Randy would say, in the world. Randy and Banachek were responsible for uncovering Peter Popoff, the televangelist who was using an earpiece to ostensibly communicate with God, a radio earpiece, and his wife was talking to him, giving him information about audience members, and so it appeared that he was getting divine inspiration, but really she was just funneling him information from prayer cards. So there's a long list of fights that Randy has fought, and education that he's engaged in. There's been a lot with dowsers also working to try and stop some of the damage that people like Sylvia Brown are capable of potentially doing. Absolutely, and not only has James Randi been sort of the face of the debunker, much to his chagrin potentially, but he's also popularized skepticism, and that cannot be underestimated. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, he's to be on the Carson show 38 times, that's something.
Yeah,
of course, he was a good friend of Johnny Carson's, mm-hmm. and the Carson Foundation continues to remember us, remember the JREF.
Oh, brilliant!
So that's a great thing, and Randy's he's an exceptional man, and he's he's friends with, or was friends with Isaac Asimov and Carl Sagan, and unfortunately these gentlemen have passed away. However, Randy continues to carry the mantle.
Oh yeah. Well, we're looking forward to all the new developments. That's very excited.
Yeah, it's an exciting time, and there's a lot of big plans, and we have a great staff. Everybody there. There's Jeff Wagg and Alison Smith, Rich Montalvo, Brandon Thorpe, myself, Linda Schallenberger. Did I say Jeff Wagg? I can't.
Yes.
But it's a staff. Well, there's maybe 8 of us, and
right.
Randy, and we all work very hard. Part of our job is really volunteer, and we're basically putting the time in to help forward. Well, as I said before, critical thinking and science education, and that's not just in the United States. That's in Canada. I mean, I'm a Canadian, and everywhere. And we work with the CFI, the Center for Inquiry, and now the DJ has come to the JREF.
That's going to be really interesting, and he is very education focused, and I'm looking forward to seeing what he's got. And right. That's our time. And thanks so much for being here, Bart.
Thanks, Desiree.
And we will very much keep everybody posted on all the new developments. And we'll be back with Radiation and Health with Dr. Marc MacKenzie right after this.
You are listening to Skeptically Speaking, thanks to the wonder of podcast technology or the generosity of one of our rebroadcasting stations. Skeptically Speaking is broadcast live out of CJSR 88.5 Edmonton, Alberta at 6 p.m. Mountain Time every Friday. If you're not in Edmonton, you can still listen to the broadcast live in our Ustream.tv feed, which you can find by following the Listen Live link on our website at skepticallyspeaking.com. You can also participate in the chat room and submit questions. During the week leading up to each show, you can find information on the upcoming episode and guest, and submit a question to be asked on the air. You can also subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. Our deepest thanks go to the stations that donate their valuable airtime to our program, including LP 99.1 FM in Madison, Wisconsin, Public Reality Radio WPRR 1680 AM in Grand Rapids, Michigan, Roslyn 101.1 in Roslyn, British Columbia, CJAI 92.1 Amherst Island Radio Broadcasting Inc., and on freethoughtradio.com. And now, back to the show.
Welcome back to Skeptically Speaking. I'm your host, Desiree Schell, and today we'll be talking about radiation and health. So we're in the studio with Dr. Marc MacKenzie, medical physicist with Alberta Health Services in cancer care. He specializes in the physics of radiation oncology within the medical physics department at the Cross Cancer Institute, where he's worked for roughly the last 10 years. He's also an assistant professor in the Department of Oncology at the University of Alberta. And his research focuses on computational methods for radiation therapy and applications of real-time imaging to treatment. Welcome to Skeptically Speaking, Marc.
Hello.
And of course, whenever we have people working for the government in any capacity, we offer them a moment to provide a disclaimer.
Excellent, because here it is. Although I am an AHS employee, and it's a fine organization, any opinions expressed here are my own. I'm not representing the AHS in any way, shape, or form.
Duly noted.
Okay.
So one of the things that I love about this show is that I am constantly reminded that there are a myriad of occupations that the guidance counselors failed to tell us about. What exactly is a medical physicist?
It's the first time I've been asked that question. No, I'm kidding.
You hang around smart people.
I know. I get asked that all the time because there are probably a few hundred medical physicists in Canada. So it's not, as you would think then, it's not a common profession. Probably a few thousand in North America. Of course, I see a lot of them. But that's probably where I work. So what a medical physicist does is they apply physics to medicine, as the name implies. Usually what that winds up meaning is you're working within the context of radiation oncology or diagnostic imaging. As well, nuclear medicine can come under that. So you'll have people who specialize with nuclear medicine. They'll specialize in PET imaging. They'll specialize with magnetic resonance imaging. They'll be coming up with new algorithms for trying to improve CT imaging as well, or new machines for improving CT imaging, new machines for improving radiation doses to treat cancer. So there's a lot of crossover with engineering as well. So if there are any students out there with an engineering physics background, just a quick plug, you can head over to our website. You can Google Medical Physics, University of Alberta. I have to say that actually, just a quick plug again. It's one of the premier graduate programs in probably North America easily. Just saying.
Marc's very proud.
I am.
So just to give everybody an absolute base level for this show, What is radiation?
Radiation really means nothing more than the transfer of energy from one place to another. So that could take the form of heat radiation. So that'd be the infrared radiation. So you're sitting by the fire, you're getting radiation from that fire, but it's heat, it's all good, it's cozy, you can roast a marshmallow. Then there are other forms of radiation. There's the radio waves that will be carrying this program to the greater Edmonton area, unrelated to, people who are tuning in on cjsr.com or through the podcast. But that's another form of radiation. The radiation I typically deal with would be ionizing radiation. So that's any radiation that has enough energy to kick out the orbital electrons. So if you can think back to high school physics and your little model of the atom with your protons and your neutrons and the electrons and the sort of fuzzy cloud around that nucleus.
This works much better for the people watching on Ustream right now.
Yes, here I'm moving my hands around in a little sphere, if you can imagine. You get a little kernel at the center. That's in fact what nucleus means, where you've got a little kernel at the center, and then you've got a cloud of electrons in probable positions around that. So when I deal with radiation, it's usually ionizing, which means that it can come in, the radiation, like an X-ray or a gamma ray, can come in, kick out an electron, and that's the kind of radiation I deal with. All right. Where was I going with this?
You're good.
You'll find this happens a lot. I'll be halfway through a sentence. Where was I going with that?
So then what does it mean when someone says something is radioactive?
Well, that means it's emanating energy. Usually you're not too worried about it. No one's usually going to say that sitting there sitting by the fire, watch out, it's radioactive. In fact, that's really not what it means. But it is radiating energy. Usually when they say it's radioactive, it's giving off some kind of high energy packet of some kind of packet of high energy. Could be electromagnetic energy. Could be a packet of electromagnetic energy, which would be what we call a photon. Could be giving off electrons, high energy electrons. Could be giving off things which are called those are called beta particles as well. It could be giving off alpha particles, which are like the helium nucleus. So again, thinking back to high school physics, I think this is covered in physics. Well, at least in the Alberta curriculum. If you think back, you'll have been told that alpha particles are high energy but easily stopped. And that's true. Beta particles, electrons, are a little less energetic but a little more penetrating, and that's largely true. And photons or X-rays or gamma rays, call them what you will, they're all essentially a little packet of electromagnetic energy, and they tend to be the most penetrating. But your mileage will vary. It depends how energetic that X-ray is. So when they say something's radioactive, it's giving off energy, and everything is radioactive. I mean, everything around us that has incorporated, carbon-14, our bodies are radioactive. So when people say it's radioactive, also they're probably meaning that it's highly radioactive. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't mention, watch out, I'm radioactive.
Okay. And that makes sense. But you said before the show that you think the radiation spectrum gives people a false impression.
It kind of does. People do think sometimes that, for example, the microwave oven that you have in your home, maybe it's dangerous because they do know it is making radiation of a sort. It's making microwave radiation. It happens to be tuned quite nicely to the vibrational frequency of water, which is how it pumps energy into the water to make them jiggle around. As things tend to move more and more and pick up more movement energy, kinetic energy we call it, that tends to be that's what heats up the water or the water inside of whatever you're cooking. If you ever toss anything into the microwave, actually I saw somebody do this once, try to melt wax in the microwave oven. Not so much. Really, there's not enough water content in there. And you'll find you'll be waiting a long, long time for anything to happen. But that is a kind of radiation. But it's not usually what we think of when people say, watch out, it's radioactive. It's radiation that tends to heat things up, but it's not ionizing radiation. We tend to think of, at least in my line of work, ionizing radiation as being a little more potentially damaging because when you actually have interactions between ionizing radiation and your genetic material, you can wind up getting either direct interactions with your genetic material, your DNA, or you can wind up creating free radicals near your DNA, which will then come in and connect and chemically react with your DNA, causing strand breaks, causing damage that needs to be repaired, and sometimes that damage is not faithfully repaired, which will lead to a mutation and which could activate a cancer.
Okay, well, let's talk about an MRI. So what kind of radiation does that use, and how does it work?
Okay, that uses a different kind. It uses non-ionizing radiation. It essentially uses radio waves. How much, what sort of radio wave frequency it uses depends on what you're trying to excite. But what happens is you put somebody inside this large, what we call it a solenoid, this large tube with windings around it, and it creates a nice static magnetic field inside the tube. So if you can imagine, you're in a big, long donut, and there's a nice magnetic field pointing rather homogeneously in one direction through that tube. Well, inside your body, any atoms that have a property called net spin, doesn't really matter, but there's some of the nuclei in your body will have a property such that they'll align up with that magnetic field. And actually, there are two possible orientations. There's a lining up with and against the magnetic field, but there's a net preference to lining up with the magnetic field. What that leads to is, for most cases for magnetic resonance imaging, the protons in your body, the hydrogens, will tend to line up in a magnetic way with that field. And so your body becomes essentially kind of magnetized. Well, you could actually pump energy into that system that will cause that net magnetization to tip away from the axis of the magnetic field. And if you've ever played with the top?
Back in the day.
Back in the day, yeah. Just before the show, I bet you were. Who can resist? Okay, so you spin a top, and as that top starts to tilt a little bit, you notice that it starts to wobble, right? We call that precession. It starts to wobble about the Earth's gravitational field. If you imagine the gravitational field pointing straight up, well, it starts to wobble about that gravitational field. Well, the net magnetization in your body will do the same thing. If you start pumping energy into it, you can cause that magnetization to tip away from the axis of the magnetic field, and they'll start to wobble around this magnetic field. Well, that winds up giving you a moving magnetic moment inside, a series of coils. And if you know how an electric motor works, well, you can actually induce a current with moving magnets inside a coil. And that's really what happens. We've got coils which pump in a radio signal, and the very same coils are used to pick up the induced electric current from these moving magnetic moments. And so you pump in some energy, and then you listen essentially for the induced electric current echo. And then by using some other gradients in the magnetic field, you can actually get spatial encoding in there, and that gives you your X, Y, Z, three-dimensional little tiny voxels of images. So if you've ever seen an MRI image, you can see a 2D image. You can actually reconstruct a full 3D image of what's inside that person. And what you're really looking at is the local chemical environment of all the hydrogens in your body. So it's kind of a cool thing to do.
Science rules.
Science definitely
Honestly. Rules. Okay, now you at the Cross Cancer Institute actually are doing some research. You've been working on merging MRI technology with radiation treatment. So what can you tell us about that?
Just very briefly, there is a research group, and you can actually, the listeners can go to LINAC-MR, so that's LINAC-MR.ca, and that will take them to our research group's website. So I think anything I'm about to say here is publicly available on that website. But what we've done is we've merged a radiation treatment machine with a magnetic resonance imager. What that potentially allows you to do is look at tumors in real time using magnetic resonance imaging, which is arguably the best technology for looking at soft tissues in the body, looking at tumors. The other thing we typically use for imaging tumors is CT scanning. CT scanning distinguishes things based on their relative, here I'm going to go into a little bit of science jargon, relative electron density. But what that means is it doesn't distinguish greatly between muscle, fat, and other regular tissues. It does. You can see the difference between them. But on MR, it's a lot more sensitive to, again, the local chemical environment of those tissues. And things like tumors can just pop in those images. So suddenly we've got an imaging technique which not only is great for looking at tumors, but it's something that you can use now with this device in real time for watching the tumors while you're treating them. So if they're mobile tumors, you'll see them moving. And one of the things I'm working on as sort of a sub-part of this project is ways to track tumors in real time using that magnetic resonance imaging information.
So how are they currently doing it then? Like, why is this a breakthrough?
That's a good question. When I started doing medical physics as a graduate student, in order to see where things were, as it were, before the start of treatment, if you can imagine, the physician may have taken a CT image of the patient to do the radiation planning, and that's even a fairly new thing, new-ish. That gives them information, sort of a snapshot in time of what the patient looked like on the inside before they start treatment.
Right.
So the tumor could progress, it could grow, it could. You could actually have, because of differential filling of things like bladder and rectum, and even if just different conditions. The patient could lose weight, they could gain weight. They can change. So what we were doing when I started was something called portal imaging. You would take essentially an X-ray at the time of treatment. When the patient was on the treatment couch, on the X-ray radiation machine for treating the cancer, you could take an image of them at that time. And again, it was a snapshot, and it would allow you to see the bony anatomy because it was an X-ray. Really, all it lets you see is bone.
Right.
So a long sought-after thing was how to get three-dimensional imaging at the time of treatment. And there have been a number of people who've proposed certain things. There's one company that has an ultrasound that kind of can be tracked by infrared cameras, so you can actually do ultrasound imaging prior to treatment and get an idea where the tumor is. There's another company that has their treatment machine is actually a combination CT scanner and treatment machine all in one. Mm-hmm. And that allows you to take a CT scan just before the treatment. Again, that's not real time, though. It's more information than we had before, and that's a very new thing, but it's not real time. So what this would allow you to do is get real-time imaging all throughout treatment, three-dimensional information. It's really unprecedented.
Congratulations.
Oh, thanks.
And actually on the website it said that that the lead machine, I believe, was online as of yesterday. So what does that mean?
Sorry, the lead machine?
It said the lead machine. There was a press release.
Okay. What I can tell you is that we have a prototype, which...
That would be the one.
Okay. Lead machine. All right.
Sorry.
We have a prototype. It's also a very small... it's a smaller scaled-down version of what... So it's not a human scale prototype, but it's a demonstration in principle. So, again, if you go to the LINAC-MR website, you can actually see photos, images taken on that machine. And, since it's not we're not treating or imaging human scale things. We're treating little boxes of this and that. So you can see some images that, they're images taken while we're actually turning on the radiation beam. Of little things that we call they're stand-ins for patients, something that we refer to as a phantom. And so you can see images there. But it is actually operating. Mm-hmm. But again, it's a prototype. It's not even remotely human scale yet.
And you guys just applied for the patent, correct?
I think the patent was applied for. I wouldn't be able to tell you exactly when it was applied for. And these things take a while to, I think, grind through and get. But I believe the provisional patent was definitely granted a while ago.
So eventually then.
Yeah.
Okay. So, actually, if you out there would like to phone in, talk to Dr. Marc MacKenzie yourself, the number is 780-492-2577, extension 1. You can also email live@skepticallyspeaking.com or tweet @skepticalradio. Now, the process of figuring out how best to use radiation has been a lot of trial and error, correct?
It has. I think so. For radiation has not been known to us for that long. So Henri Becquerel discovered radioactivity back in 1896, I believe, and Wilhelm Röntgen, a German scientist, developed the X-ray tube back in 1895. So really, we've had a little over a century to get used to the idea of radioactivity and X-rays. But shortly after discovering X-rays, of course, you might be familiar with the story of Röntgen, how he was working with evacuated tubes and getting these nice sort of glowing beams when he was actually running electrons through a gas. Well, as he evacuated it further and further, and these electrons started to interact with so there's a cathode, which is what releases the electrons, and there's an anode where they accelerate toward. As they're interacting with the anode, they're actually creating X-rays. And he didn't know this was going on, but he found some photographic plates in a drawer nearby were getting darkened, and he didn't know why. And then he made the connection to his machine. It wasn't that long after that there was a Swiss colleague, physician. He had the very first X-ray ever taken. And if you've ever seen, there's a very famous one where there's a hand with a ring on it. And some people think it's Röntgen's wife's hand. No, it's a man's hand, and it's this Swiss physician. So shortly after that, there's medical applications already being thought of. But not only that, but after Becquerel discovered radioactivity, Pierre and Marie Curie were also working on isolating radioactive elements from pitchblende. So you know that they isolated polonium and they isolated radium. Now radium, it was, I think, Pierre Curie who had discovered fairly early on that he could give himself burns by placing radium on his skin. These are early days. People don't know what they're messing with. And it's it boggles the mind how cavalier they were. And not only did Marie Curie and her daughter Irene die of leukemia, a number of other workers also, early radiation workers died from contracting cancer.
Well, let's talk about this
Sure.
This practice process. Maybe tell us about the situation with screening women for TB.
All right. So back in, I think it was the 1930s, I'm trying to remember, there was screening being done using high radiation dose fluoroscopy, screening women for tuberculosis. And there's a famous case where it actually was going on in Nova Scotia. And a number of these women developed breast cancer. So it has been fairly well established that at reasonable doses and reasonable dose rates, that cancer induction is a real possibility with radiation, with ionizing radiation. And again, this was, it was early days. People didn't really know what they were doing. Radium used to be painted on watch hands.
Oh, I have a whole bunch of questions about what we used to do with radium, let me tell you. Well, but I believe we actually have a listener email.
All right.
In an MRI, why doesn't the realignment of atoms hurt you?
Why doesn't it hurt you? Well, it's a very sort of, it's really not a very harmful process. Your atoms aren't being shifted out of place, as it were. They're staying fixed where they are. In fact, they're remaining fixed. Usually the hydrogens are part of, much larger macromolecules. So they're not being wrenched around by the magnetic field, but they're rather inside just the nucleus. They're lining up with the magnetic field. So there's no real net movement of atoms, if that's what the question was. It's just the nuclei are being aligned and then sort of moved around. But if you can imagine the nuclei are staying stationary, but they've got a sort of directionality to them. I'm moving my hands a lot. For those who are watching online, let me just hold my hands up here. But if you can imagine, they are sort of fixed, but they're little balls that have like a directionality to them. If you imagine a dot on the ball, and that dot lines up with north, dink, all of a sudden. But it's staying in place because it's still fixed to a much larger molecule.
You'd be great in a classroom. I can see that.
I hope so. Well, you can ask my students.
Let's go back to practice. I like the practice. We used to use fluoroscopy in shoe stores.
I think this is amazing. I actually had a professor here at the U of A who told us, as a kid, that was a great thing. You'd go in, you'd stick your foot in, you could just wiggle your toes around, and you could see your foot inside the shoe.
That sounds like danger.
It's kind of sounds a little crazy. And I actually crunched some numbers on this, and I have to try to remember what I came up with. It's not as bad as it sounds, depending on what sort of time exposure you have it in for. And this is the thing with radiation. I think radiation detriment has to do with a number of things. It has to do with the type of radiation. It has to do with the dose rate, like how quickly are you receiving that radiation. It has to do with how long are you exposed to that radiation. It can be mitigated by shielding. It can be mitigated by distance. So inside the shoe store, it depends how close your body gets to the X-ray source. And in fact, there was a great, and I can show it to you later, but not to the listeners right now. But you can Google it.
You can send me a link, and I can post it on the show notes.
Absolutely. In fact, I'd love to send a number of links because there's just a lot of neat stuff out there. When I was trying to sort of do some number crunching, I was trying to figure out, what were the dose rates like on these shoe devices? Also known as a pedoscope. I
gave a teacher homework. I just need to print this out. Sorry, continue on.
There is a nice plot, and in medical physics, we love to have isodose plots, which is to say lines where you get an equal radiation dose, and those will occur at certain distances away from a machine. The highest radiation doses for that machine were not at sort of the viewing port on the top, but they're, as you can imagine, closest down to where you stick your foot. And I was a little bit horrified to think of little Timmy standing there with his shoe, his foot in the shoe, in the little slot that it goes into, and his gonads being as close as they probably would have been. Poor little Timmy. But
and I'm also thinking, actually, that many, many mothers, while they go shopping, would be like, Timmy, go play with the machine. Stand there as long as it takes for me to find a pair of shoes.
The thought is that the exposure for these things, well, of course, you would be limited to how long you could run the machine by the heat capacity of your X-ray tube. That's a little technical point. I think, as I mentioned with Röntgen, as he's accelerating these electrons from the cathode to the anode, well, the anode tends to heat up because X-ray production is incredibly inefficient, especially at the low energies that you'd be dealing with here. It actually increases with energy, but we don't need to talk about that. But for these energies, it would be incredibly inefficient. So the anode would heat up, and you're going to crack your anode if you run it for too long.
Okay.
So there would be actually a time limit to how long they would probably run the tube. The estimate I saw on dose rates would probably be about and let's put this in terms of your background radiation, about 1/8 to 1/12 at the very most at your foot of your total annual average background radiation level. So we tend to measure radiation in, as we were talking about the other day, a whole number of units, and there are lots of different units for measuring radiation. But when we're talking about radiation protection, the unit we most often use is the sievert. A sievert is equal to a joule per kilogram times some kind of quality factor for the radiation, because different kinds of radiation, as already mentioned, have different capacity for doing biological damage.
So what I don't understand is, for example, when you're screening for TB and you're blasting radiation at someone to test for something,
right?
And then you realize later that there's an awful lot of breast cancer after this becomes a widespread practice. But then you have an individual you have, I'm assuming, widespread fluoroscopy in shoe stores. So why don't we see higher incidences of cancer in feet as we did in breasts?
That's a very good question. Because for whatever reason, I guess because they're not typically, rapidly dividing tissues or tissues that have a lot of turnover, but the extremities tend to be more radiation resistant than the rest of your body. In fact, that's enshrined in legislation with the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission that your extremities have a higher radiation dose limit than the rest of your body.
That's interesting. How do you study stuff like this?
Well, I mean, part of this has come out from experience with an inadvertent experience as well with the radiation tolerance of various tissues.
Okay.
So typically, I'm sure it was just noted that certain tissues have a higher radiation hardiness, as it were. And in my field, getting back more toward the radiation therapy side of things, it's a wealth of clinical experience that physicians have noted that beyond this radiation dose level, we tend to see more of these kinds of complications in terms of normal healthy tissue. The whole goal of radiation therapy, as you can imagine, is to try and overwhelm the tumor but not hurt the normal healthy tissue around it.
So, speaking of studying, though, are you able to glean any of this kind of information from studying things like Chernobyl, for example?
Chernobyl gives us some idea as to what the outcomes will be for, medium dose range effects. It's really hard to tease out sometimes what the effects are from very low radiation doses and low radiation dose rates. I guess, unquestionably, that kind of information will get rolled into the greater body of knowledge. A lot of our assumptions about what the effects of radiation will be, though, are based on things like the survivors of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki blasts. Although it's a funny kind of disconnect between applying that kind of information back to lower doses and lower dose rates. As you can imagine, the people involved in those incidents received a very high dose rate and higher dose levels, as opposed to the kind of radiation that you're getting all the time from cosmic radiation, from your internal potassium-40 radiation, from terrestrial radiation.
Audience, you can call in at 780-492-2577, extension 1, or live at Skeptically Speaking, or at Skeptical Radio on Twitter. Now, I want to talk about that. We are always radioactive. And you mentioned cosmic radiation and terrestrial radiation. So explain how we become radioactive.
All right. Well, there's a naturally occurring percentage of every atomic species, every chemical species that we have will have different number of neutrons. As long as you have the same number of protons, it's the same chemical species. So there are a percentage of the atoms in your body that will just naturally be of the radioactive variety. So really, as far as your body goes, almost entirely your internal dose comes from potassium and potassium-40, which is an isotope. And in fact, the P in isotope means the same number. Iso means the same, and P in isotope means the same number of protons. And that's what gives you the fact that it's still potassium. So that's sort of the internal radiation. The cosmic radiation comes from things like, you can have galactic cosmic radiation from external sources to our solar system. You can also have things like coronal mass ejections from the sun, which will result in particles coming toward the Earth. A lot of that we get protected from by the magnetic field around the Earth because, if it's a charged particle, it will tend to follow along the magnetic field lines. And as far as terrestrial radiation goes, a lot of that is things like, uranium and uranium byproducts. There's a little bit of it everywhere.
I believe we have a call.
I believe we have a
call. Caller, are you on the line?
Yes, I am.
Hi, this is Tom from Edmonton, I hear.
Hi.
Go ahead.
It's a bit of a tangent, but I was wondering if there's a way of, if there's two separate radiations that when they fire through the body don't cause any harm, but if they interact in the body, could be used to battle a cancer or something by sort of aiming them at different angles. You understand what I'm saying? Like you've developed this way of imaging in real time. Is there some way to aim the radiation, two radiations that wouldn't interact except in the tumor?
That's interesting. What that actually brings to mind a couple of things. One is that right now we don't have any way of actually having radiation that will either just preferentially interact or not interact, or you can't really get them to sort of combine so that they're only interacting where they cross. But what we do tend to do with radiation therapy is we do tend to crisscross multiple radiation beams so that the area of overlap is defined purely by the tumor that we want to treat. And that way we actually get the radiation dose level in that area up as high as we can by crisscrossing the beams. But it still doesn't mean that the healthy tissue that all those beams pass through on the way to getting to that crisscross point, they do deposit energy. They will do some damage.
Right. But the most of it would go in the tumor.
But most of it does go into the tumor. And in fact, some of the recent advances in how to distribute that radiation have to do with better adhering and better crisscrossing the radiation so that it overlaps as much as possible just within the tumor. Your question does bring to mind something else that has been tried, and it's something called boron neutron capture therapy. Now, it's really kind of interesting that boron, if it captures a what's called a thermal neutron, so a fairly slow energy, a slow moving, low energy neutron. If it captures it, it will break apart and it will momentarily go into a higher energy state and then break apart into two high energy particles. And if you could deliver boron or some boron compound selectively to the tumor and then fire in a beam of neutrons, it used to be thought that that would be a fantastic advent for radiation therapy. The trouble has always been, though, getting the boron to just the tumor. And the counter argument is that if you could have something which was so selective that it would go to just the tumor, you could put anything on that. You could put a drug on that would then kill the tumor. You could put an alpha emitter, something radioactive that emits radiation, but it only emits radiation when it gets to the tumor. So people have thought about how to do that kind of thing. So I think it's a very insightful question.
Thank you, caller. Now, we had another interesting question submitted via the website.
The question is, would you speak a little about the ramifications of a Mars mission? If the level of contamination could be rendered acceptable, what would be the long and short-term consequence for the crew? Do you consider interplanetary radiation on such a mission an insurmountable hurdle at this time?
And I realize that's not necessarily your area.
Actually, it's literally a million miles away from.
Oh.
I'm sorry. That's terrible.
It's fine. Move on.
Sorry. She's rubbing her head. Okay. So, a Mars mission, that's a great question because it brings to mind, it's really quite neat. When you do get up out of the Earth's magnetic field, you are going to get more cosmic radiation. In fact, if you take a transatlantic flight, you're getting more radiation because you're going up higher and higher. In fact, you get more and more radiation as you go up higher and higher in the atmosphere until you get to about 15 kilometers. Then it peaks and then it starts to come back down, which is kind of cool. There was a fellow named Fotzky, P-F-O-T-Z-K-Y, I believe, who discovered this in 1936, that you had this peak. This seems like a tangent, but really I'm going somewhere with this.
I was bearing with you, yes.
That's because, and the reason it goes higher and higher is because you get more and more cosmic radiation. And that's what is, it's not a real limiter, but as you travel in an airplane, you're going to get anywhere from 1 to 10 microsieverts an hour. And again, I mentioned maybe that background radiation is about 2 millisieverts an hour. So we're going from milli to micro. So if you think of your radiation dose for the year of being about 2 to 3 millisieverts, up in the plane, you're looking at most 0.01 of that, probably more like 0.005 of that. A lot less. 1/1000th of what you would get in a year. But you're getting that on an hourly basis as you travel around on the plane. Still not enough that airplane crews actually, keep their radiation doses down to acceptable levels. Apparently the average flight time for a crew is about 600 hours a year, and if you run the numbers, it works out. It's not that much.
So how does that relate to Mars?
As you get higher and higher up. So people in the International Space Station are probably getting on the order of 10 microsieverts an hour, or 0.01. And that's pretty average. It can actually get higher once you have, say, a solar storm and you get these coronal mass ejections from the sun. You get energetic particles coming toward the International Space Station. And the ramification is that as you leave the belt, you get even more and more of that. The astronauts that went to the moon had a few days worth of fairly, more intensive radiation, but it still was not that high. And it's also typically not super high dose rates, and they are partly shielded by the vessel itself. So the thinking, there's actually a radiation protection office within NASA. So you can actually Google it, go to their webpage. They've estimated that probably on a 10-month mission to Mars, I think it was, that they would increase their risk of contracting cancer by about 3.4%, which is, all things considered, substantial. Mm-hmm. That's a substantial increase. But again, that's a guess. Right now, we have places on Earth where you have very high background radiations. Ramsar in Iran has about 100 times the radiation level we have probably here in Edmonton in terms of background radiation. And in fact, because it's low dose rate, but a high dose, it seems to be fine. There doesn't seem to be a huge detriment to the population there. So,
and I'll accept the link for that study as well.
And so that could bode well for a mission to Mars. And they have talked about special shielding inside to shield for higher energy particles.
We have no time. left everybody.
I can't believe the time's gone by.
It's engaging. I think it was actually all the hand gestures myself. It took up time. So thanks very much, Dr. Marc MacKenzie.
You're quite welcome.
And if you'd like to actually hear more from Marc, you can check out his radio show on CJSR. It's Senior Blues.
No,
it's Toast Marketing.
Toast Marketing.
They alternate weeks. I can't remember.
But I'm on tomorrow.
You're on tomorrow.
At 7 a.m.
7 a.m. Oh, lucky you. That's Mountain Time, people. Spoiler alert, he doesn't talk about radiation on his show. He just plays music. And this is your official almost last reminder. If you're planning to submit a new theme song for Skeptically Speaking, you have until the end of the year to do it. We're very excited about the ones that we've already received, and that makes us want more. I'm getting the eye. I'm getting off the air. You can find details about everything else that you could possibly want to know about the show at skepticallyspeaking.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Next week on Skeptically Speaking, we'll be talking about microbiology with Lisa Hammett. Pathogens, viruses, probiotics, antibiotics, DNA. If it's too small to be seen without a microscope, it's up for discussion. Call in and question everything on the next Skeptically Speaking, every Friday at 6 p.m. MST, here on CJSR.
South America does not exist. The moon is painted on the sky. Things sometimes fall up, but you never see. And everything you believe is a lie.
Dinosaurs were invented by God as a test. Our bodies don't rot when we die. Oh, the hippies are working for the government, and everything you believe is a lie. It's been years,
but I've never loved you,
and I never will,
though I've tried.
We'll never get married.
I'm dating your sister, and everything